Hi everyone, this is Matt with ESI Survival Guide, an online resource to help legal professionals navigate the electronic wilderness. And today we are here in the concrete jungle, and we're going to talk about eDiscovery survival tips that you can glean from marathon running. But before we do that, let's go ahead and run the Brooklyn Marathon real quick. Come on. We just finished. So that was the Brooklyn Marathon. Now let's go talk about some eDiscovery survival tips. Now let's run through some eDiscovery survival tips that we can learn from marathon running. And I'll weave in and out between both my experience running and my eDiscovery survival tips for legal professionals. It's probably a fairly niche video focused on the marathoning eDiscovery professional, but hopefully you'll get some value out of this video. And if you do, feel free to consider liking the video, leaving us a comment, maybe sharing it, or if you could, subscribe to the channel. We're always coming out with new content. And remember, this is an entertainment and educational resource only. These are my thoughts, not necessarily the thoughts of my employer or really anyone else on the planet but me. And at the end of the day, if you are in a dispute, if you're facing a matter, or if you're simply trying to improve your eDiscovery, your technological competence, really you have to do the same thing that you would do when training for a marathon. You got to get out there and put in the work. Now, I will admit these tips on their face are very general, and I'm not a fan of general answers, and I'm not a fan of the "it depends" response, although often "it depends" is the right answer. Yes, having a toolkit, having a plan, communicating, measuring, reporting, these are all obvious elements of any successful process. So I'm going to try to get a little more specific in my explanations and provide more focused resources for further study. And some of this will be a little basic for the experienced practitioner, but it's always helpful to revisit the fundamentals of a reasonable, great eDiscovery effort. eDiscovery survival tip number 1. Thoughtfully assemble an eDiscovery toolkit. Now, running is a very simple act, but to be a successful marathoner, there's actually quite a lot of tools that you use to help you run more efficiently, go faster, and run more comfortably. Shoes, socks, clothing, recovery tools, fitness watches, training plans, supplements, even cryotherapy. All of these can play an important role in getting the most out of your running. 4 pieces of tech in my running survival kit. Number 1, the Bose SoundSport headphones. These are the best fitness headphones in my opinion. And no, Bose is not sponsoring this video, but Bose, if you're out there, feel free to send me another pair of these. I have run 7 marathons and 1 ultra, and these things, the comfort, the sound, they're unbeatable. I actually might change my will to be buried in these things. I love them so much. So the Bose SoundSport headphones, an amazing piece of technology for your marathon toolkit. Number 2, Hammer Nutrition's Endurolites. These are electrolyte replenishment pills. And I have to say, these things are my secret weapon. On a race day, after I hit 2 hours of any race, I take 2 of these every 20 minutes, and they are a lifesaver. Number 3, a great running app and/or fitness watch. These are a runner's best friend for tracking all sorts of metrics and tracking your progress. Although there are huge variances between watches and apps, and I'm lumping these all together as metrics trackers and training aids. There's so many good ones out there. The Strava app is a great app. Runners love to use Garmin running watches. This is the Approach S4, which is a fantastic watch. I use the Adidas running app because the free version gives you a ton of functionality, and I combine that with the Fitbit Versa 3. This is less of a hardcore running watch, but it's a great fitness watch for everyday wear. And finally, piece of technology number 4, I have to say, Aquaphor. This is something that everyone needs to have that's a runner. If you're a runner, what is the worst thing besides injury? Chafing. And if you run long enough, you're gonna chafe somewhere. I basically cover myself in this stuff when I run in all the obvious places, but also sometimes I'll run with a GoPro and I have the harness on. So I'll put some of it on my neck, on my shoulders to make sure that I can get through a race. There's nothing worse than having chafing down in a race. Usually you probably won't even notice it until you're done, but I have to say it is not a very nice experience. So definitely Aquaphor is one of my go-tos. Now, in that same vein, there are many pieces of technology out there that can play a role in a successful eDiscovery effort. And you have to know the capabilities and the limitations of your tools. The legal tech market has grown so rapidly over the past 20 years, and there's no shortage of great tools out there to address all sorts of needs and challenges, but it can often feel like you're drinking from the fire hose. There are massive end-to-end eDiscovery platforms, tools that are hyper-focused on a narrow issue. There's some tools that require very specialized expertise, and there's some tools that are more self-service when you have a little bit of training. But whatever your circumstances are, there is a tool for you. But how do you build that toolkit? And then once assembled, how do you make sure you're maximizing its utility? If you're starting from scratch, you can run a request for information or an RFI to gain market intelligence. Basically, you blanket the marketplace or maybe focus on a niche group of service providers and technology developers to really ask questions and engage them in a process to find out more of what they can offer you. You can read market reports, you can check out demos, you can also do a proof of concept using a sandbox environment consisting of test data, though I always find POCs very challenging. Either they don't replicate a real world scenario very well, or case teams really struggle to find the right matter on which to run a POC. So what I would suggest, if you do a proof of concept, you really have to work hand in hand with your service provider to make sure it's going to be valuable. Now, service providers may suggest a test environment on either a dead case, or you might run a proof of concept in tandem with a live matter. Usually, though, cost and expending resources can be issues here. Now, I think personally, one of the best ways to build your toolkit is just to jump in and test drive some technology. And don't just bring something in or use it because that's what everybody else is using, or even because it demos really well. Really work backwards from your needs. Understand your data, understand your case profile, maybe survey some internal users or even external users, especially if you're a law department and you frequently use law firms or service providers. What are the issues you consistently run up against? Uncover those first and then draft a series of questions. Use that understanding to then focus on core features and really rely on your service providers. Your solutions consultant should be able to quickly map your needs to functionality within a tool, as well as that tool within defined processes. Maybe starting with a smaller, less document-intensive matter, give it a test drive with your service provider riding shotgun. Hands on the wheel, feet on the brake, and go from there. Once you have a foothold in that piece of tech, you can then really build up your competence and better understand how you apply a tool further across your matter portfolio. You might even decide more clearly what you want to actually bring in-house and what parts of the eDiscovery process you want to outsource. The real key here is that you want to consistently learn and you want to consistently improve. I probably use 10% of the actual functionality on my Android phone, but I really do want to learn more. I know this thing is a much more powerful device than I give it credit for. I get by day to day, but I'm always on YouTube trying to learn new features incrementally over time. And I do the same thing with the eDiscovery tech that I use. I just take little bites. Little lessons can really be game changers. And as you learn what your tools do well, you'll better understand their limitations. And once you understand limitations, you can identify gaps and supplement your toolkit and evolve your capabilities. And that's what it's all about, is evolution. A new contractor doesn't go out and buy one of everything at Home Depot on day one. She buys the tools she needs for that first job, and then she grows and adapts as she faces new building requirements. And your toolkit doesn't always have to have the newest, shiniest, fanciest, and most expensive tools. Some of the oldies but goodies, like Excel, still play a major role in eDiscovery and project management. Top experts use Excel for chain of custody, as collections trackers, organizing load files, and of course, priv logs. Pivot tables and charts in Excel are extremely powerful reporting tools. Find tutorials, go on YouTube, educate yourself. There's so many resources out there. Now, there are whole blogs that are dedicated solely to reviewing eDiscovery tech across all of the EDRM nodes, as well as larger domains from information governance and records retention to forensics, legal hold, discovery analytics, doc review, and more. Here, I'll highlight 5 interesting pieces of eDiscovery technology. Now, these 5 tools may not be for everyone's toolkit. eDiscovery toolkits are as diverse as the individuals and teams that use them. The key is you have to find the right toolkit for you. But here are 5 great tools to start your research and investigate further. First, Relativity and Relativity 1. Probably the most widely adopted eDiscovery platform that has really grown into a worldwide community. I love the keyword expansion and cluster visualization functionality. Sightline from Concilio. Now, full disclosure, I work for Concilio, and we offer dozens of tools across several legal service verticals, including Relativity. But Sightline is an extremely adaptable eDiscovery tool that incorporates very powerful data analytics to support the self-service model, as well as full-service use cases from large complex litigation and second requests to internal investigations and data subject access requests. Next is Onnit. Now, this is going a little beyond eDiscovery, I have to admit. Onnit is an enterprise legal management software that functions almost like an app store. This platform goes way beyond eDiscovery into process automation across corporate departments, contract lifecycle management, and more. It's more than just a tool. It's a series of tools and the customized toolbox as well. Another amazing tool for law departments and specifically legal operations is Sky Analytics by Concilio. This is an extremely powerful business intelligence and department management tool that we are using for a number of use cases. What I think is most interesting is that we're using it now to actively support certain diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, which we're going to discuss in a later video. And last but not least, BrainSpace. BrainSpace translates complex data into intuitive, easy to understand interactive data visualizations. It really enables case teams to see patterns and relationships in their data sets quickly. And BrainSpace is all about getting lawyers to key insights faster using powerful artificial intelligence models and visual analytics. In my opinion, the interactive communications map and the meta dashboard are 2 of the coolest features of any tool out there. Developing your competence within a specific piece of technology is a great way to build your expertise and your confidence while exploring different processes, different nodes of the EDRM, and case tactics in real time. But in addition to understanding tech to build your toolkit, you really have to intertwine building your understanding of core concepts, your understanding of data types, and various other knowledge domains. This knowledge helps inform your research as you build your toolkit, as well as better engage and ask more thoughtful questions when you demo a piece of tech. You want to start with the issue and then get the tool. You don't just go out and buy a hammer first and then just bang on everything until you hit a nail. Here are just a few research topics that can help steer your efforts in building a successful toolkit. Active learning models for data reduction and review. If you aren't familiar with active learning models or what simple active learning is versus continuous active learning, I've included some phenomenal resources for you from Maura Grossman and Gordon Cormack, two pioneering scholars in the areas of technology-assisted review, advanced data analytics, and artificial intelligence for legal. The volumes of data that lawyers are facing within their matters today are increasingly unstructured, complex, multilingual, and rich with metadata. The most effective legal teams of the future are going to be using AI-based solutions, and most of the leaders already are. Discovery has clearly moved way beyond email and eDocs. Data from collaboration tools like Zoom and MS Teams, social media and chat data are all part of our matters. Don't be a passive user. Learn about these new methods of communication and these data types so you better understand how to marshal data from these sources through the eDiscovery process and the need to supplement your eDiscovery toolkit and keep it evergreen. I've included two pieces that I think will be helpful here. One is on emojis in eDiscovery, and the other is formatting productions of data from mobile devices. eDiscovery survival tip we can glean from marathon running number 2. Know the rules, know your route. It's extremely important to fully understand the local, state, and federal rules that frame your eDiscovery effort. And the rules can also give you a tactical advantage if you use them properly. It's all right there in black and white. And whether in the eDiscovery context or the marathon context, these are rules that are definitely not meant to be broken. For any marathon, there are usually some common, very important rules. Time for the bag drop off, your corral assignment, how your bib is displayed, where you can go to the bathroom, whether hydration packs are allowed. There are a lot of rules. And these all sound simple enough, but there's always that person that ends up having a restricted item on them and it just jams them up. One tip for the New York Marathon, I would recommend against the bag drop. I advocate for doing the post-race poncho. If you follow the rules for checking a bag, when you're finally finished and you're done with the marathon and your legs are gone, you're gonna still have about what seems like 10 miles to walk away from the spectator area to get your bag. Not cool. Understanding the rules of race day help guide you towards a more successful outcome. The eDiscovery rules serve as your guide in that same way. They structure your effort. What we call the federal eDiscovery amendments to the rules of civil procedure originally became effective in 2006 and then were amended in 2015. There are state equivalents that generally map to the federal rules, and there's a further layer of local and hyperlocal rules and guidelines. Your rules and how they apply, of course, depend on your jurisdiction. And various regulators also have their own sets of rules and protocols related to eDiscovery. Consider, for example, the different specifications in a second request from the DOJ versus one from the FTC. So you have to know your rules. Now, we cannot cover all the important rules, but just to highlight some of the greatest hits, I'm going to highlight 2 federal rules that really give you an advantage if you use them properly, and then an important set of local rules. Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 26B1, Discovery Scope and Limits, Scope in General. Dang it! Now this one is a little on the obvious side, but the tactic comes from the way this rule was amended in 2015. When the rules were amended, proportionality moved to the forefront. Among the changes, the language defining the scope of permissible discovery was changed to omit discovery reasonably calculated to lead to the discovery of admissible evidence. Now, when it comes to proportionality, that was already part of Rule 26B. The proportionality factors were moved from Rule 26B to C3, slightly rearranged, and there was one addition. And that addition was the explicit instruction that courts consider the parties' relative access to relevant information. Now, George Washington Law School brought together a number of top legal, technology, and eDiscovery experts from all over the place who are in the process of building a framework that you can use to assess the proportionality factors in a focused, comprehensive manner with the aid of heat maps and cost tables that help categorize custodians and data sources by priority and burden, respectively. A link to the framework is in the show notes under survival tip number 4, and we're going to do a video on the framework as it develops. Up next, Federal Rule of Evidence 502. This rule governs what happens when there is a disclosure of communication or information that's covered by the attorney-client privilege or work product protection. Rule 502 attempts to accomplish these goals primarily through Rule 502D. Rule 502D permits parties to enter into a court order preventing waiver for privileged documents produced in the proceeding. The Sedona Conference has a very, very, very helpful commentary on the effective use of 502D orders, which I will link in the show notes. The more local rules that I wanted to highlight are those of New York's Commercial Division, which was formed to improve efficiency in the case management of commercial disputes that are litigated in New York State courts. On March 7th of 2022, Chief Administrative Judge Lawrence Marks signed an administrative order amending a series of rules aimed at the handling and management of electronically stored information. I've included a resource on that in the show notes. Now, whether during an eDiscovery effort or a marathon, think of the route that you take, which is essentially a set of rules in and of itself. If you run afoul of the route during an eDiscovery project, you can face any number of sanctions and other consequences. Similarly, if you go out of bounds during a marathon, you're not going to be too happy with your results. Some folks, including myself at times, like the newness of running a route they've never looked at before, but it's a best practice to know your race route so you can plan around major increases or decreases in elevation, bottlenecks, and other features of the course. Charting a path to navigate through any endeavor is a primary part of forming a plan for success. Personally, when I'm planning out my race strategy for a marathon, I make sure to begin around the pace group that has my target finishing time. I run the first 4 miles behind my target marathon pace, and I use the slower pace to let the pack thin out and to avoid jumping all around erratically, trying to get around other runners in tight spaces, which can lead to a lot of injury. By mile 4 to 5, I try to push past my target pace and get out at least 2 minutes in front of that target pace setter to give myself a cushion. And then by mile 10 or so, I sink back into my pace. There are all sorts of mental gymnastics that go on during that time as well. Now, if I know the route and I have a plan, I can then adjust my effort with confidence to account for long uphills, downhills, which are harder than uphills in my opinion, bridges, bottlenecks again, almost anything that comes at me. Now, this is the same with eDiscovery. Most eDiscovery freakouts, stress, mistakes, and missed opportunities result from simply not having a plan. Now, attorneys often think that they can wing it. I know I've done that before, and they want to try and cut costs and time up front. They assume they can adapt and adjust easily to any issue that might come up, so they often put certain important things off to the back end. Even if you're successful at taking any of these approaches, it doesn't mean that you should. Having a plan for the route that you take through an eDiscovery effort that is informed by best practices, that is documented, ideally battle tested, flexible, and the product of diverse input is key to surviving and thriving. Now, there is no need to reinvent the wheel when somebody else out there has already invented a rocket booster. Shout out to my friend Kelly Twigger. Kelly Twigger from ESI Attorneys and eDiscovery Assistant has put together a masterful multi-part series on planning out your eDiscovery efforts and building that into an ESI protocol, which I'll link in the show notes as well. Kelly lays out 16 categories to be considered for an eDiscovery protocol. And while 16 may seem like a lot, Kelly gives us a very important tip. It's important to start from a comprehensive footing and then know what you're leaving out. While your eDiscovery plan might draw from the same core elements, they must be specifically tailored to your case and your jurisdiction. Now, I have to first say that eDiscovery Assistant is not sponsoring the video. I just personally think it's a fantastic resource. It is an entire learning platform that takes more of an issue-based approach to dealing with eDiscovery. It's probably the most comprehensive collection of case law available. It accelerates legal research. It has tons of amazing resources like glossaries and forms and checklists. To be honest, the forms and checklists section alone is super valuable, with dozens of resources like chain of custody forms, model protective orders, data mapping guidance, meet and confer resources, preservation letter templates. The list goes on and on and on. I use it and I love it. Another resource that I thought would be helpful just to frame your efforts is the 3rd edition of the Sedona Conference's Resources for the Judiciary. This is a supplement from April 2022. It's always great to work backwards from the guidance and best practices upon which judges are relying. This document lays out 20 stages of litigation, which in tandem with the EDRM, I think really gives you a simple yet comprehensive framework for what you need to consider during your planning phase. And there are 2 eDiscovery survival tips that we can learn from marathon running. The first being thoughtfully assembling your toolkit. The second being know the rules and your route. Now, I know those are pretty generic, but hopefully there are some specifics in there that you found valuable. If so, feel free to hit the like button, share the video, and leave us a comment. What are some of the pieces of tech that are in your eDiscovery toolkit? What are some of the steps that you take to plan? What are some of your marathon tips? We're going to come out with a whole series of these eDiscovery survival tips that we can learn from marathon running. And with that, this is Matt telling you to stay safe out there in the electronic wilderness. See you next time.